Well, hello, welcome AP World History students. We got a doozy of an instructional video for you here today, and here's the rub for us. World War II is a central moment in world history, certainly in modern world history. It's also a really appealing subject for its drama, for the sort of dark undercurrents of it, for the I guess heroic aspects of the story that the United States plays. For many students, that's very meaningful. At the same time, the college board, in constructing this course, says, really the mechanics of wars are not of that much interest to us. They're interested in causes of wars, effects of wars, and then in many ways they're interested in like what the war was like for people on the home front. But talking about the war itself is not sort of what the College Board is that interested in. And so typically I will go with that guidance. And in this case, this is the exception. We're going to spend 2 class periods learning about the Second World War because I think it's just worth it. And I think some of these stories are worth our spending time on. And so if we just look here, our learning target for today, the supporting learning target just says, I can explain the causes of World War II. Why did this happen? And we'll get up to sort of the turning point of the war today. And then our long-term learning target for this whole Unit 7 or Period 4, especially the Unit 7 part about global conflict, is I can examine the darker undercurrents of modernity and human nature. We will see that play out here. So let's talk about this Second World War that's really born out of the embers of the First World War and the global depression that follows in the 1930s. Now, a lot of wars, you have to be really careful when you oversimplify their causes because you sort of can annihilate the truth a little bit, right? So if you say the First World War was caused by the assassination of the Austro-Hungarian Archduke, yeah, I mean, that's a simplification that has an aspect of truth to it, but boy, it leaves so much of the story out to the point where it's just not, it's really not a great explanation. World War II, though, I can give a 5-year-old an explanation for why World War II happened. That's more or less true, right? That holds water. That explanation is something like, well, kid, there were a couple countries, Germany and Japan in particular, and their buddy Italy, who were being very naughty. And the rest of the world tried to kind of ignore their naughtiness for a while or just live with it until they decided, you know what, they have to be stopped. And that's kind of the story of what causes the Second World War, is the Axis powers, Germany, Japan, Italy, coming to power and destabilizing world politics through their wars of aggression that eventually the rest of the world kind of wakes up and says, we have to put a stop to this. We frequently talk about the war. We talk about Germany first in terms of the Axis powers, and Germany was the leading member of the Axis powers. But really, the war starts in East Asia, and it starts with Japan. Japan, which has industrialized, as we've learned, they are looking to imperialism as their route to the future. They feel frustrated because they were left at the little kids' table at the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. And so Japan has been on this course to expand as a way of getting more industrial resources, oil in particular. And their expansion has been brutal in the extreme, in particular in Korea and in northern China or Manchuria. And that's sort of owing to some old cultural grudges, I guess we could say. But what is experienced by Korea and Manchuria in the 1930s is really horrific. And the newsreel footage that would hit the rest of the world was terrifying in terms of the treatment of civilians, in particular the use of rape as a weapon against the women of mainland China. And to the rest of the world, this was just like, what on earth is happening right in East Asia? At the same time, in the rest of the world, they're saying, we have a Great Depression we're dealing with. The stuff in East Asia feels very, very far away. The United States, the League of Nations were like, hey, Japan, take it easy. But there wasn't much of an appetite beyond that to really intervene because there was a sense of we're dealing with a lot of our own problems here. And so Japan began this surge of expansionism in the 1930s. And then we also see that playing out with the rise of the fascist powers in Europe. And of course, Germany is the leading partner here. Italy takes part often when sort of egged on or when given permission from Germany. And so, this all sort of starts, it's like these incremental steps that Germany takes toward becoming a dominant world power again. It starts with kind of remilitarizing in ways that the Treaty of Versailles didn't allow them to do. But when Hitler would take these steps toward remilitarization, he didn't really get much of a response from the rest of Europe or from the League of Nations, right? It was sort of a, hey, that kind of thing, people kind of yelling, but not doing anything in response, getting a scolding. And Hitler, like the naughty kid in class, sort of recognizes, I can get yelled at, but they don't actually do anything here. Like nothing's really actually happening. I'm just getting yelled at. And I don't like getting yelled at, but I don't especially mind it either, especially when nothing else happens as a result. And if I can just sort of take my lumps and get yelled at, then I can wait a few months or half a year, and then I can do it again. I can take some more. And so Italy is expanding into Ethiopia with this sort of trying to get retribution from these battles, this war they had lost in Ethiopia generations earlier, and also with this sort of cockamamie scheme to rebuild the Roman Empire in the mind of Benito Mussolini. Hitler's talking about the need for Lebensraum, or living space. Autarky is a word he uses. Like, we need to be able to have enough space to produce the stuff we need to sort of feed and provide for all the German people. We should unite all the German-speaking peoples. And so Hitler expands Germany. He takes over Austria in kind of a friendly way and kind of coaxes the Austrian government. It's a threat. It's a veiled threat. Like, we can do this the friendly way or the unfriendly way, and Austria chooses to go with it the friendly way. And Germany takes control of Austria. And then Germany starts taking chunks out of Czechoslovakia, where they say there's German-speaking peoples that they want to unite under the single German flag. And so they're taking chips and pieces there. And it's like Hitler takes a little bit and then looks to see what the rest of the world does. And the rest of the world's like, knock it off. And then they don't do anything. So then he waits a little bit, and then he takes some more. And he keeps saying, this is it. This is all I need. This is all I'm going to take. And it's like this pattern plays out over multiple years. And so we have Germany in dark red here, which is like their territory at the end of the First World War. Then he's sort of moving his army back into this Rhineland region, taking control of Austria, taking control of the outer rim of Czechoslovakia, then soon enough taking all of Czechoslovakia itself. And all the while he's just saying, hey, the Treaty of Versailles was unfair, it wasn't right, and I'm just sort of setting things right. I'm putting things back the way they ought to be, and I'm done now. I'm done now. Now we've united the German-speaking peoples, and that's all I need to do. Now we've got some resources to feed and fuel ourselves, and that's all I need to do. And the rest of the world, feeling very distracted by all this Great Depression stuff, kind of again scolds and yells at Germany, but doesn't really actually respond with force. In fact, the response of the rest of the world is called appeasement. And the idea of appeasement is giving an enemy, or a bully in this case, that's a way to understand what Hitler's doing, giving a bully what he wanted in exchange for an agreement to stop. So giving the enemy, okay, you can keep Austria, you can keep the Sudetenland, you can keep your militarized forces in the Rhineland, you can keep all Czechoslovakia, fine, just stop. If you agree to stop, then you can keep it. And Hitler, who's always a great kind of actor, Hitler could be whoever his audience needed him to be. Hitler was like, of course, this was all I needed, right? Of course I'm going to stop. He could appear very sensible, especially if he's meeting with Western leaders. He can just be like, yeah, absolutely. Like I'm done. We're cool now. It's all good. We can live in peace. And so everyone will feel like, okay, I think we dealt with this. I think we managed this. And you look back at this appeasement strategy later and you say, of course, it's a colossal, spectacular world historic failure. Like, what the rest of the world ought to have done is smash Hitler at the beginning when he was much more smashable, when he was much weaker, instead of like allowing him to strengthen himself and mobilize and remilitarize Germany until it's like an enormous force and it's going to result in a worldwide catastrophe. They should have just dealt with this much earlier. They should have stood up and strongly opposed him right at the outset. Why wouldn't they do that? Let me give you some reasons for appeasement. See if we can talk ourselves into this. One reason that's just very sensible is that war is really bad. And the First World War, everyone has sharp memories of it, the French in particular. and the British, of course, but like this was awful. The First World War, our nightmare is having to do something like that again. Any scenario where we keep the peace is better than war. That's one of the reasons. They also said, we're dealing with this worldwide depression. We have enough problems on our own. We really can't, we don't have the wherewithal, we don't have the emotional bandwidth to sort of like in the face of this, to turn and deal with this rising force in the east of Germany. We just can't deal with it. They also sensed, Britain and France, that, we would need American help on this. And I think the Americans are in no mood to jump into another European war. And gang, they were right on that. The American mood was like, peace out. Good luck, Europe. Good luck, Asia. We aren't touching this stuff with a 10-foot pole. Americans had zero interest or appetite in it. And Franklin Roosevelt, the American president, did have interest in it, but he's enough of a politician to know my voters don't have interest in this, so we're not doing it. There was always a sense that like Hitler, when we talk to him, he seems reasonable. He wrote a book that's crazy town, right? Insane. He gives speeches that are kind of insane, but when we sit down and talk with him, he seems actually reasonable and sensible. I think we can reason with him. And so at this so-called Munich conference in 1938, after about 3 years of German aggression and expansion, they signed this deal where Germany and Hitler agrees, I will stop, no more expansion, and in exchange, I get to keep everything that I've already taken. And to Britain and France, they feel like, good, finally, all right, we've preserved peace. And to Hitler, he feels like, I've looked Germany and France in the eye. They are afraid of war. And so if I let this moment blow over and wait a little bit and then do it again, they're going to do the same thing again. They are never going to fight back. That's Germany's take on this. And so about a year later, September 1st, 1939, Germany invades its neighbor nation of Poland. It's very clear at that moment that Germany had no intention of abiding by the Munich Conference Pact. Germany was just biding its time, and it did it again, expanding to the east. And in a way, the horrifying part was that in a way that appeared coordinated, and that was coordinated, the Soviet Union, far to the east, attacked Poland at the same moment. It appeared to be coordinated, that the Nazis and now the Soviet Union were working in partnership. And so this is the start of the war. This is when the rest of the world, where Britain and France in particular, kind of wake up and they're like, oh my gosh, like we couldn't reason with Hitler. The only way to stop him is to force a stop to him. And now we might have waited too long, because now not only does he have all that territory, now he's taken Poland as well. And what is revealed is that the Nazis and the Soviets have signed not quite an alliance, but what's called a non-aggression pact, an agreement to not go to war with each other. The British and the French had this pipe dream that maybe if Hitler keeps going crazy, he'll pick a fight with Stalin and the Soviet Union, and those two can just blow each other to kingdom come and deal with both of our problems at the same time. There was some thought that maybe they'd get lucky enough that just their two problems in the East would deal with themselves, but now they're kind of like teamed up with each other. And so this is horrifying for Britain and France. This is like we've overslept. We've overslept on this, and now we're in deep, deep trouble. So they declare war belatedly on Germany. Germany's like, yeah, cool, because we've sort of been at war for a couple years now, as a matter of fact. The German army is in mid-season form. They are rolling over the armies in Poland. They are ready to rock and roll. They start sweeping through the Scandinavian countries, through Denmark, through Belgium. Like they are just rocking and rolling at this stage. And so the situation at the formal outset of the war is the Axis powers of Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and Fascist Italy, which is the junior partner here. Britain and France are the allies trying to get the magic together from World War I. The Soviet Union has been bought off, and the United States is uninterested in getting involved in another European war. The first year or so, year and a half of fighting is heavily in the favor of the Nazis. The Nazis, like I mentioned, were in mid-season form, and they have a heavily offensive style of war called blitzkrieg, or lightning war, that really emphasizes the use of shock, surprise, and offensive weapons like tanks, airplanes, motorized trucks. And what their move is not to sort of march as a single line through the through like through France or through Belgium or Denmark or any of these countries. That's not what they're doing, or the Soviet Union later. What they're trying to do is use their armies almost like a sword, just jabbing at the enemy, overwhelming them so that it appears that the German army is everywhere all at once. And the British and French forces fighting in France, unlike in the First World War, are not able to sort of absorb that first German, assault and then sort of push back. Instead, they break. So the initial German attack in France just breaks the French defenses. And frankly, in a certain way, psychologically, the French were broken. There was a sense where it's like the French could not awaken to the reality that we have to do another world war. We have to do another conflict like this again. We'd hoped that like the cup would be taken from us, but instead we're being forced to drink it. And like the French defenses just get smashed. And the world is sort of thinking, okay, we're going to see a playbook like the First World War where now the Germans are really going to meet their match. But instead what happens is in a matter of weeks, France is overtaken. France is overrun. And the entire war almost ends at the beaches of a place called Dunkirk in northern France, right along the English Channel, where the entire Allied expeditionary force, British and many French soldiers, are pinned along the beach with no way to evacuate. And at that moment, there's a slight snafu in the Nazi communication lines. The Air Force holds off on attacking the Allied forces sitting on the beaches because the Air Force thinks that the Army was going to take care of them. The Army believes that they've been given sort of orders to stop and refuel and recharge because the Air Force was going to sort of deal with the forces left over on the beach. So there's like a slight pause in the miscommunication. And in that short window where the Nazis kind of held off their attack on these forces pinned on the beach, the British coordinated an evacuation using mostly civilian boats, like 70% civilian boats, just people's own yachts and private ships, some as small as what you might see out on Lake Minnetonka, going across the English Channel to evacuate these soldiers back to Great Britain. And there is this feeling that the Allies, the war could have been over at that moment. Hitler could have smashed the last of the Allied forces and just been the master of Europe at that point. But the Allies pulled a rabbit out of a hat. The new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, says, good job, everybody, but we can't evacuate our way to victory. That's not really going to do it. And you have this, I suppose, high water mark, late 1940, early 1941, in which Japan has expanded across the Pacific. The Nazis are marching down the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Hitler is here. He spends like a few hours in Paris just to see it, get the famous photo op. He's now the master of Europe, and the French people don't know what hit him. And it is a sense of like, what on earth has just happened in the world? The next stage is the Nazis saying, well, we're going to take out Britain here. This is 1940 into 1941, stretches a little bit, but really it's like the tail end of 1940. And the Nazis' approach was, we're going to batter and bruise Great Britain. We're going to bomb them into oblivion here. And so the Battle of Britain is fought primarily in the air. And the targets are there's some military targets that the Nazis are trying to bomb and destroy, but it's mostly civilian targets. It's the cities themselves and the industrial capacity of Britain to sort of militarize itself. And the British don't surrender. Like the British are getting battered and bruised. They're the only Allied left standing. Their cities are getting annihilated every single night. And their job is to just hold on. Winston Churchill, the prime minister who had been elected in 1940, the previous prime minister who signed the Munich Conference Pact was dismissed, right? That's the end of him. And Churchill comes in, and Churchill is famous. What he's most famous for is inspiring courage and a fighting spirit. Like, okay, we're the only ally left. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep fighting. In one speech that was given via radio that just became world famous at the start of the Battle of Britain, he said, it's worth reading aloud. Churchill said, "We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France." And take note, they're in England. He's prophesying we're going back to France. So we shall fight in France. We shall fight in the seas and the oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight in the beaches. We shall fight in the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. He's just saying to the British people, he's saying to Hitler, we are not surrendering. You can bomb us to smithereens, but we are not backing down. We're going to continue to fight on this. Tellingly, when the broadcast is over, Churchill turned to an aide and said, he sort of mutters, he says, we'll fight them with the butt end of broken bottles because that's bloody well all we've got. Like, they needed help. And you're wondering, where are the Americans on this? So the Americans are watching now, they're with great interest, but also a strong sense of we don't want to send our boys over to fight. But at the same time, if we ignore this long enough, this fight might become our problem. It might be turning into our problem. And so there's still a large majority that says we don't want to go to war directly, but if there's a way to help the Allies, particularly Great Britain, I think we ought to. I think we should. And so in that spirit, Congress, and really pushed along by President Franklin Roosevelt, passes a few laws, the most famous of which is called the Lend-Lease Act, which is basically a blank check. If you're in the Allied powers, the United States will just give you weapons, right? We will give you arms and munitions. We will build it. We'll give you whatever we got. We're just going to give it to you. Pay us back whenever you can, whenever you get a moment. Franklin Roosevelt said, it's a great speech. Roosevelt said, it's like your neighbor's house is on fire and you just give him your garden hose and you say, take it. You don't sit there and say, now, when are you going to pay me back? Or when am I going to get this back? You just say, take the garden hose. Your house is on fire. You have a crisis. Just take it. We'll figure it out later. And, and so at this point, the United States announces that they are effectively furnishing the war. They're paying for the war. The U.S. government is. It's a declaration of economic war. And FDR also says, and we're going to build up our military here because I got a bad feeling that soon enough we're going to get pulled into this thing, whether it's in Asia or in Europe. And when that happens, I don't want to have to wait around for a year to be ready to fight like we did in the First World War. I want to be ready at the drop of a hat to send soldiers to fight. And a key turning point, where we're going to finish, is that when Hitler is sensing that his efforts to defeat Britain in the Battle of Britain are stalling out, they're not successful, like his momentum is slowing down in the West, and he senses the Americans maybe joining, Hitler says, I need to change the momentum here, and what I want to do is take care of the Soviet Union. He calculates we can defeat the Soviet Union in a 6-week war. Their armies are so weak, we'll do to them what we did in the First World War, so we will take care of them, we'll grab all the resources of the Soviet Union, and then we'll be able to turn and face the British and the Americans and deal with them. And so Hitler makes the choice, a catastrophic choice, to start a war in the East as he's also fighting a war in the West. And this will turn into a grave error because he does not get the 6-week victory that he claimed he would get. Instead, he gets bogged down in a total mess. And the fighting in the East will be something wicked, and it will really start to turn the tide of the war. So there's a lot more to come, but that's our first half of the story, gang. I want to thank you for that. Our situation is now that there is a new ally. The French have been occupied, but there's now the Soviet Union, and soon enough we know the Americans are going to be entering this war as well. So you've got a little bit of work to do with some LEQ work and then a progress check, gang, but yeah, that's the first half of World War II. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon. Bye.